For more than a century, Ford has been celebrated as a bedrock of American industry, a proud symbol of innovation, determination, and tradition. Factories in Detroit and across the Midwest once represented the height of industrial might, cranking out vehicles that helped define the American way of life. But beneath that familiar badge and behind those assembly lines lies a rapidly changing reality that could upend everything people thought they knew about this iconic automaker. Today, rumors are swirling that Ford is making a bold, some would even say, shocking strategic decision. At first glance, it may seem like a standard corporate pivot, but whispers from inside the company suggest something far more seismic. Loyal fans worry this move could signal a break from the values Ford once championed: support of the American worker, devotion to domestic manufacturing, and a steadfast commitment to staying on home turf. Skeptics, on the other hand, argue this is precisely what Ford must do to keep pace in an era defined by global trade pressures and a skyrocketing demand for electric vehicles. So, what exactly has Ford done to rattle longtime supporters and energize critics? The details remain partly under wraps, but a flurry of leaked memos, insider tips, and high-level announcements hint at an impending shift that could send production lines overseas, away from the very country whose workforce built Ford into a household name. The stakes? Potentially massive job losses, swirling political fury, and a question mark over how American automakers can thrive in an age dominated by rapid tech breakthroughs and fierce international competition. Yet the story doesn't end with an overseas plant or a rumored cost-saving plan. Ford's executive team appears to be playing a high-stakes chess match, one that involves forging new alliances, reorganizing supply chains, and potentially redefining what it means to be an American automaker. Are they sacrificing tradition for survival? Or is this a visionary leap that could actually strengthen Ford's position for the next 100 years? When a legendary brand like Ford rocks the boat, the ripples quickly turn into waves. Union leaders are mobilizing, families tied to factory jobs are bracing for uncertain times, and Washington is on the verge of a meltdown, especially one former president with a track record of fierce nationalism and unwavering public commentary. This is more than a business story. It's a modern saga of identity, loyalty, and the tough choices that define the future of an entire industry. Buckle up. In the coming sections, we'll reveal the details of Ford's rumored shift, the reasons behind it, and how the fallout may reshape the American manufacturing landscape. We'll dive into whispers of betrayal, talk of saving face, and examine whether the forces of globalization have become too mighty for even the strongest American institutions to withstand. As you follow along, consider how these events might affect your own perspective on cars, jobs, and the shifting notion of national pride. One thing is certain, by the end of this saga, you'll see Ford, and maybe even the entire auto industry, in a radically different light. For decades, the heartbeat of Ford has been tied to the assembly lines in cities like Dearborn and Wayne, where workers in blue coveralls tirelessly piece together everything from family-friendly SUVs to iconic muscle cars. The image of American labor forging the future of personal transportation has always been as integral to Ford's brand as the distinctive oval logo. So when news leaked that Ford might relocate a significant segment of its manufacturing abroad, the public reaction was immediate, and it was intense. The essence of this rumored move centers on electric vehicles, the emerging frontier in automotive technology. Typically, one might assume that a giant like Ford would pour resources into cutting-edge development at home, feeding the local economy and securing an American lead in the EV race. Instead, insiders claim the company is eyeing production sites in countries where labor and raw materials are cheaper or more readily available. Suddenly, the brand that was once the poster child for Made in the USA stands accused of turning its back on the workforce that shaped its very identity. To many, this feels unthinkable. After all, Ford was one of the original pillars of American manufacturing. Henry Ford's revolutionary production line methods in the early 1900s transformed how the entire world thought about manufacturing. Countless families in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and beyond have stories of parents or grandparents whose livelihoods depended on those union-backed jobs building the vehicles that propelled America through 2 world wars and into the modern age. But times have changed. Globalization has kicked open doors to new trade deals, emerging markets, and advanced technologies that allow companies to produce vehicles more cheaply halfway around the world. Ford, like other major automakers, faces staggering competitive pressures from upstarts and established players alike. Add the surging interest in EVs, where batteries, microchips, and specialized components are essential, and the shift in strategic thinking becomes clear. Materials like lithium, nickel, and cobalt aren't always abundant in the United States, and their costs can spiral with tariffs or unstable supply chains. For a major corporation like Ford, the need for cost control isn't just about profit margins, it's about survival. Still, the emotional weight of this possible move is hard to overstate. Labor unions, already grappling with layoffs in traditional automotive roles, view any overseas shift as a betrayal of the nation's workforce. Families dependent on Ford's local operations worry about the trickle-down impact on everything from local shops to schools. Meanwhile, consumers find themselves torn between a desire to support American products and a recognition that modern manufacturing, especially for EVs, often demands global resources. The immediate question is whether Ford can walk the tightrope between embracing inevitable change and preserving the aura of its American roots. Perhaps the leadership believes that forging a path overseas is the only practical way to stay competitive in an EV-dominated future, or maybe, as some critics argue, it's a purely profit-driven decision that abandons the very people and values that made Ford a legend. Either way, the unthinkable is now on the verge of becoming reality, and the world is watching every twist in this unfolding drama. As soon as headlines blared the news about Ford's rumored overseas shift, a flurry of speculation emerged. Why now? Why in this way? And is the company quietly implementing a master plan that reaches far deeper than anyone outside the executive suite realizes? Some argue that Ford is simply responding to hard-nosed market realities, like electric vehicles are expensive to build, especially in a landscape where tariffs on essential metals can fluctuate overnight. At the same time, global competitors, particularly those in Asia, have made astonishing strides in developing affordable, high-capacity batteries. If Ford clings to traditional production in high-cost locales, it risks being left behind in a fiercely competitive sector by relocating certain processes or entire production lines. Ford might slash overhead enough to invest heavily in R&D, ensuring its EVs remain relevant against rivals like Tesla, BYD, and Volkswagen's electrified lineups. But others take a darker view. Could Ford's move be part of a strategy to pressure American lawmakers into offering new incentives or more favorable policies? Companies have, in the past, threatened to shift operations overseas to extract lucrative subsidies or special tax breaks. If Ford can convincingly waive the possibility of foreign production, it might prompt Washington or individual states to sweeten the pot for keeping manufacturing on home turf. That theory suggests a high-stakes game of chicken between the automaker and political leaders who want to preserve American jobs at nearly any cost. Meanwhile, there's another angle that casts the situation in an even more contentious light: betrayal of longtime employees. For many workers, Ford is more than just an employer, it's a cultural and familial institution. To see factories close or shift production out of the country stings on multiple levels: economic, psychological, and symbolic. Union heads have hinted at the possibility of walkouts, strikes, or aggressive contract negotiations. They question whether corporate leaders are turning their backs on the very people who built the brand's reputation from the ground up. Amid these tensions, unconfirmed reports suggest Ford is also scouring the globe for new partnerships, especially with battery manufacturers who could supply the next generation of EV cells at a fraction of the cost found in the US. If Ford secures exclusive deals or invests in overseas battery plants, the company could lock down a supply chain that ensures long-term competitiveness, even if it accelerates the exodus of jobs from American soil. The central question remains, is Ford playing a brilliant chess game, sacrificing certain pieces to ultimately checkmate the competition? Or is the company making a cold, profit-driven decision that sells out its own historical identity and workforce? The reality might be a tangled blend of both. As details dribble out, it becomes clear that no single factor explains Ford's moves entirely. The cost of raw materials, the breakneck speed of EV tech, the need to impress shareholders, and the political climate all swirl together, forming a perfect storm of difficult choices. Yet, whatever the company's deeper motives, the immediate reaction from employees, unions, and consumers speaks volumes. The sense of betrayal is palpable in many quarters. On the other hand, certain investors and market analysts applaud Ford's willingness to adapt, saying such drastic measures might be necessary to survive in a marketplace that's rapidly evolving beyond the old paradigms. Which side has the stronger argument? That depends largely on your perspective and on how well Ford manages to keep its promises to workers and the American public. Ask anyone who grew up in a neighborhood dotted with auto plants, and they'll tell you. Now, when a company like Ford sneezes, entire communities catch a cold. Families rely on steady paychecks, local businesses count on those workers as customers, and the tax base that funds schools and public services leans heavily on manufacturing. So the mere hint of Ford shifting operations overseas has already sent shockwaves through countless small towns and big cities alike. On the assembly line, anxiety is running high. Workers who've spent their entire adult lives in Ford plants, often following in the footsteps of parents or grandparents, are bracing themselves for potential layoffs. These jobs haven't always been easy, but they offered stability, decent wages, and benefits that made the American dream feel attainable. If the rumored overseas move becomes a reality, many wonder if their specialized skills will remain relevant or if they'll be forced to retrain for an entirely different industry. Unions, typically the first line of defense for such workers, are gearing up for what could be an epic showdown. Union leaders have already started drafting contingency plans, ranging from targeted strikes to demands for severance packages that might protect laborers as best they can. The stakes are enormous, and some whisper that the outcome of negotiations with Ford could set a precedent for how other legacy automakers proceed in the EV era. If Ford proves it can relocate production without facing crippling backlash, other companies might follow. Conversely, if the unions stand their ground and galvanize public support, they might deter widespread offshoring in the broader automotive sector. Beyond the assembly line, the ripple effects extend to a network of suppliers and local businesses. From the metal stamping plants that churn out fenders and doors to the small machine shops that fabricate specialized parts, each relies on the steady demand tied to Ford's domestic production. Restaurant owners, retail shops, and real estate agents in these factory towns also fear the fallout. When hundreds or thousands of workers face job insecurity, spending plummets, houses remain unsold, and the economic fabric of entire regions can start to fray. Then there's the younger generation, technicians, engineers, and software experts who've pinned their hopes on a modernized version of the auto industry. They've pursued degrees in robotics, electrical engineering, or battery technology, envisioning a future where American EV plants are hotbeds of innovation. These individuals still hold out hope that Ford's shift could bring new types of jobs in R&D labs or advanced manufacturing facilities, possibly offsetting losses in traditional assembly roles. But whether that hope becomes reality depends on how Ford structures its investment at home versus abroad. In the short term, the workforce remains caught in limbo. Some see an opportunity, maybe the pivot to Azure's will generate new cutting-edge roles that keep their communities thriving. Others feel deeply betrayed, worried that all the talk of innovation is just code for cheaper overseas labor. Until Ford clarifies the details, how many plants will be affected, how many new American jobs might appear, and what support will be offered to displaced workers, this tension is unlikely to subside. What's certain is that these ripple effects are more than abstract numbers on a balance sheet. They represent real families, real neighborhoods, and real livelihoods. In the coming months, the manner in which Ford navigates this labor minefield could either preserve a semblance of trust or tear a deeper rift between the company and the communities that have sustained it for generations. It didn't take long for the political arena to ignite. As soon as rumors of Ford's move hit the airwaves, one of the most vocal figures in modern American politics turned his gaze on the automaker. Former President Donald Trump, known for his America First mantra, publicly blasted Ford in a fiery address that quickly circulated across social media platforms. With characteristic flair, he accused the company of abandoning the hardworking men and women who built its success, warning of retaliatory measures that could shake up the entire auto industry. Trump's comments struck a chord with a significant segment of the population that remains fiercely protective of domestic manufacturing. For years, he championed policies like tariffs and renegotiated trade deals aimed at discouraging corporate offshoring. In Ford's rumored strategy, he saw a direct challenge to the ideals he'd espoused: loyalty to the American worker, pride in homegrown businesses, and a belief that domestic production should be prioritized over global expansion. True to form, he doubled down, calling for boycotts of Ford vehicles and hinting at the possibility of punitive tariffs or other forms of economic pressure against companies that ship jobs overseas. While some dismissed Trump's reaction as political theater, it undeniably added fuel to an already roaring fire. Media outlets on both sides of the aisle debated whether Ford's decision was a savvy business move or an act of corporate treachery. Conservative commentators sided with Trump, painting Ford as a turncoat that cared more about shareholder dividends than about the families that had long relied on the company's prosperity. Progressive voices, on the other hand, pointed out that global economic shifts are often more complex than simple patriotism versus greed. They argued that if America wants to dominate the EV revolution, it must acknowledge the realities of multinational supply chains and remain flexible in its manufacturing strategies. Ford, for its part, responded with a carefully worded statement. The company emphasized its ongoing commitment to technological innovation, pointing out that it still invests billions in American R&D centers and advanced engineering programs. Executives underscored the potential for new domestic jobs in software development, battery research, and specialized EV design. However, they didn't back away from the notion that certain production lines might be more efficiently placed overseas, especially when raw materials and manufacturing costs under US tariffs make domestic EV production economically challenging. Trump's explosive response also signaled a looming showdown in Congress. Lawmakers sympathetic to his viewpoint began drafting proposals that would penalize companies relocating production outside the US or that rely heavily on foreign made components. They argued that stronger legislative interventions are necessary to stop the bleeding of American jobs. Meanwhile, other policymakers contended that doubling down on protectionist measures could stifle innovation and push more companies to set up global operations to circumvent US red tape and high tariffs. All this political wrangling leaves Ford in a precarious position. The company risks antagonizing not just Trump, but also large swaths of the country that remain skeptical of globalized economic models. Yet, retreating from the plan could mean losing critical ground in the race to build affordable, competitive electric vehicles, a race that many believe will determine the future of the automotive world. As the stakes climb, so does the tension, with Trump's fiery rhetoric setting the stage for a broader question. Can any American automaker truly remain an American automaker if it relies on global operations to stay profitable and cutting edge? Amid the clamor of political threats and public outcry, rumors have emerged suggesting Ford isn't acting alone. Insiders whisper about possible mergers, acquisitions, or at least strategic partnerships that could reshape how Ford conducts business, both at home and abroad. At the center of this speculation are foreign tech giants and battery manufacturers who see an opportunity to partner with a storied American brand eager to modernize its EV supply chain. Why would Ford entertain such alliances now? One word: batteries. The power source is the heart of every electric vehicle, and dominating EV markets means securing advanced battery technology, reliable manufacturing, and stable access to crucial metals. Tesla famously blazed trails in vertical integration, controlling much of its supply chain. For Ford to keep up, it needs a robust strategy that might require deep collaboration with specialized companies already experts in battery chemistry and large-scale production, entities that might be based in Asia or Europe. Some reports point to hush-hush negotiations with Chinese firms that have mastered cost-effective battery manufacturing. Others suggest that Ford could be eyeing partnerships with European tech companies that hold valuable patents for next-generation solid-state battery cells. These cells promise longer range, faster charging, and greater durability, potential game changers for the global EV marketplace. Although forging deals overseas might spark further controversy, it could also position Ford at the cutting edge of EV development, securing it a place among the top contenders. There's also talk that Ford might be teaming up with smaller American startups focused on AI-driven vehicle software or autonomous driving systems. Such collaborations could help Ford differentiate itself from competitors and spark new lines of revenue. This approach might ease some of the tension around offshore manufacturing by showing that Ford is at least keeping elements of research, development, and advanced engineering in the United States. Still, these initiatives might pale in comparison to the potential scale of overseas production expansions, especially if that's where the bulk of cars and components are actually built. Moreover, speculation about a partial merger with a foreign automaker or tech conglomerate has left industry observers buzzing. What if Ford joined forces with a global EV leader, pooling resources and expertise to accelerate the transition away from gasoline? On paper, this could yield enormous benefits. In practice, it risks diluting Ford's identity as a distinctly American brand. It also raises concerns about intellectual property rights, profit-sharing agreements, and the broader ramifications for American labor. For every potential deal, there's a litany of questions. Will these partnerships come with strings attached, like demands for more overseas production? Could they trigger national security concerns if key technologies move offshore? And how would the public react to seeing one of America's most iconic companies enmeshed in foreign-led business alliances? The possibilities are thrilling and troubling in equal measure, stirring up even more uncertainty in an already tumultuous climate. One thing is certain, if Ford finalizes any of these rumored alliances, the conversation around the company's global shift will intensify. Mergers and partnerships might open up new markets and technologies, but they'll also shine a spotlight on whether Ford can remain a fundamentally American enterprise at heart. In a climate where every corporate move faces scrutiny from politicians, labor unions, and consumers, such deals could either be hailed as visionary or vilified as one more step away from Ford's storied heritage, or as the dust settles, at least temporarily, one question looms above all others. What's next for Ford and for American automakers in general? The industry is at a crossroads unlike anything seen in recent memory. Technological leaps, shifting consumer preferences, and the mounting urgency of climate change have pushed everyone toward electric vehicles, whether they're ready or not. Yet, the push for EVs doesn't exist in a vacuum. It intersects with fierce global competition, complicated supply chains, and political unrest fueled by the fear of losing precious jobs. Ford's rumored decision to shift certain production lines overseas might be a harbinger of a broader transformation. Industry insiders predict that if Ford successfully manages this transition, navigating public opinion, labor disputes, and political backlash, other American automakers will follow suit. GM, Stellantis, and even newer entrants to the automotive scene might look to replicate Ford's cost-saving measures, adopting a more multinational approach to car building. In that scenario, the definition of an American car could shift dramatically, hinging less on where it's assembled and more on the brand behind it. On the consumer side, reactions are mixed. A segment of buyers passionately believes in purchasing vehicles that are made in America. They see it as a moral imperative, a patriotic duty to keep American workers employed and manufacturing strong. Others accept that the world is far more interconnected than it was decades ago. To them, a car's nationality matters less than its affordability, technology, and environmental impact. They'll gladly drive a Ford with foreign-built components if it outperforms the competition and lines up with their budget. Meanwhile, corporate executives at Ford and beyond are wrestling with how to balance legacy expectations with the demands of a new era. On one hand, brand identity and heritage remain powerful marketing tools. On the other hand, chasing innovation and profitability may require breaking from old methods. Straddling these lines can be perilous, especially when a single announcement like shifting production overseas can spark a national uproar. Governments around the world, including the US, are also crucial players in this unfolding narrative. The Ford and other automakers perceive that domestic production is financially untenable due to tariffs, high labor costs, or inconsistent regulation, then globalization becomes almost inevitable. To counteract that, lawmakers might need to create more enticing incentives, tax breaks for building EVs domestically, greater research grants for battery innovations, or robust trade agreements that secure stable flows of essential materials. But these measures take time, consensus, and political will, resources that aren't always abundant in an era of polarized politics. Then there's the matter of workforce readiness. Transitioning from internal combustion engines to electric powertrains demands new skill sets. Software engineering, electronics, and specialized chemistry knowledge for battery manufacturing aren't areas where traditional factory workers necessarily excel without retraining. Could state-of-the-art EV plants in the US provide a new wave of jobs for a workforce in flux? Possibly, but that depends on whether companies like Ford invest in large-scale programs to reskill employees, or if they simply relocate the high-tech parts of their operations to existing hubs overseas. In other words, the road ahead is paved with uncertainty. Ford's journey, controversial as it may be, highlights the tipping point for an entire industry caught between its storied past and an unpredictable future. If one of America's most iconic automakers is openly reconsidering where it builds cars, it signals that the ground beneath the US auto industry is shifting. Every player, politicians, unions, investors, and consumers has a stake in how this story unfolds. Whether they collectively manage a smooth transition to a new automotive era or allow fear and discord to guide the narrative remains to be seen. After all the drama, the leaked memos, the fiery speeches, and the breathless commentary, we circle back to a central critical question. Is Ford's rumored overseas shift a shrewd adaptation to an unforgiving global market, or a betrayal of the very values that built its reputation? In truth, it may be a little of both, an uncomfortable mix of strategic foresight and disruptive upheaval that reflects the new realities of modern manufacturing. On one side, Ford's leadership is determined to remain relevant in a hyper-competitive EV landscape. Materials like lithium and cobalt often come more cheaply from abroad. Battery expertise is emerging fastest in certain international markets, and labor costs outside the US can be dramatically lower. If Ford fails to adapt, it risks ceding ground to companies that are more nimble or better connected to international resources. If the American auto industry wants to lead the EV revolution, it must figure out how to overcome the hurdles presented by high tariffs, unpredictable trade policies, and the complexities of advanced manufacturing. On the other side, there's an undeniable sense of loss for countless workers and their families. Ford isn't just another multinational corporation. It's a pillar of their personal history. The sight of factory gates padlocked or assembly lines shutting down leaves a gaping hole in communities once buoyed by stable union jobs. And in a broader cultural sense, the idea of an American automaker offshoring any part of its production can feel like a betrayal of the national fabric, especially for those who view self-reliance and hometown pride as cornerstones of the American identity. Caught in the middle are political figures like Donald Trump, whose explosive rhetoric may or may not translate into effective policy. Trump's vocal condemnation of Ford's strategies resonates with millions who feel their way of life is under threat. But an equally strong contingent believes that clinging to old methods will only slow America's progress in an era where innovation and global cooperation are keys to success. The tension between these perspectives underscores a deeper national debate about how to balance economic growth with ethical obligations to workers and communities. Beyond the immediate storm, what happens next could reshape the automotive world for decades. Will Ford's gamble to court international partnerships and pivot to overseas EV production pay off, creating a leaner, more future-proof corporation? Or will backlash from unions, consumers, and policymakers make the costs of leaving home soil too high to bear? If Ford weathers this storm and emerges more competitive in the global EV race, it might inspire other automakers to follow. However, if the move triggers severe political and economic repercussions, it could signal a more complicated path forward for anyone eyeing similar strategies. In the end, The story of Ford's possible exodus from traditional American manufacturing is about much more than cars. It's about the identity of American industry, the meaning of loyalty in a globalized economy, and the potential costs and benefits of technological progress. Whatever side you land on, whether you see this as a practical necessity or an unforgivable betrayal, there's no denying that Ford's actions are forcing a moment of reckoning. The outcome will offer a roadmap for how or whether iconic American brands can retain their soul while competing in a fast-changing world. Yeah, is this a new dawn that ensures Ford's future leadership in advanced vehicles, or is it the beginning of an irreversible shift away from the American ideals that once underpinned the auto industry? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear. Ford has dared to break from the playbook that anchored it for over a century, and the reverberations could alter not just the fate of one company, but the entire American manufacturing landscape. Perhaps the most critical chapter of Ford's story isn't the one we've just seen unfold, but the one that's still unwritten, and in that blank space lies the destiny of American cars, workers, and the global economy itself.